Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, welcome. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, my name is Moira Anderson, and I am the Director of Public Programming here at Crystal Bridges and the Momentary. And what a beautiful afternoon to welcome you here for a culminating program that celebrates the exhibition American Sunrise. We've had such a powerful weekend of programming on reflection, creativity, and connection, and I'm really excited that this is going to cap it off. I'd like to begin this program with our Indigenous peoples acknowledgement, recognizing the museum's role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many Indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of Indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonization that museums have played, and as cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change. Today is the final day to witness American Sunrise, which is the exhibition that was co-curated by Jordan Poorman Cocker, curator of Indigenous Art and NAGPRA officer here at Crystal Bridges, and Ashley Holland, curator and director of curatorial affairs at Art Bridges Foundation. This exhibition is guided by three themes: Indigenous futurism, place, and kinship. It celebrates the historical and ongoing relationships of Indigenous people carry with the land, intergenerational artistic expressions, and the resilience of kinship between Indigenous artists and place. We'd like to acknowledge that many partners have contributed to the development of the exhibition and the rich weekend of programming surrounding it, to the Dobkin Family Foundation for their generous sponsorship of American Sunrise. Their support has been instrumental in bringing this exhibition to life. To Arkansas PBS for live streaming today's program, allowing audience beyond these walls to join in on this celebration. And to all of the artists who have traveled from near and far to be with us this weekend. We are deeply grateful for your presence and your contributions. Please join me in recognizing them. So the exhibition title, American Sunrise, takes its title from Joy Harjo's celebrated poetry collection, and all weekend long we've explored the layered narratives, lived experiences, and artistic expressions that radiate from that title and the works in the exhibition that represent. Yesterday in the galleries, if you weren't here, we hosted a conversation between artists Yadika Fields, Nicholas Galanin, Cara Romero, and moderated by Jordan Poorman Cocker. And it was a dialogue that echoed the energy and the purpose of the opening talk that happened last November with artists Terry Greaves, Jerry Redcorn, Kelly Church, and Jane Austin. Then earlier today, at the Momentary, we hosted the Cherokee Film Festival screening that brought another dimension to the weekend, bringing cinematic storytelling with the themes of the exhibition. We were so fortunate to be joined by Rory Boney, a featured artist in American Sunrise, for that program. And now, of course, it's our immense privilege to conclude this exhibition and the weekend of programming by welcoming Joy Harjo, poet, performer, musician, and the 23rd United States Poet Laureate. Joy is an internationally renowned artist of the Muskogee Creek Nation, whose work has transformed the landscape of American literature and expanded our collective understanding of Native voices in poetry and beyond. She has published 10 books of poetry, several plays, children's books, memoirs, and has received countless honors, including the Ruth Lilly Prize for Lifetime Achievement from the Poetry Foundation and the Guggenheim Fellowship. Her music, just like her poetry, weaves memory, resilience, and spirit into powerful forms of expression. Joining Joy on stage today for a conversation is Jordan Poorman Cocker, curator of the American Sunrise exhibition here at Crystal Bridges. Her curatorial vision has helped shape this exhibition from its earliest days, and it's truly a gift to have her guide this final weekend of programming with us. This afternoon's event will begin with a reading by Joy Harjo, followed by a conversations between her and Jordan here on stage. And then following the program, I invite you to stay with us here in the Great Hall for a book signing with Joy. Thank you again for being part of this fantastic weekend. Please join me in welcoming Joy Harjo to the stage.
Henje Stongo. I'm glad to be here from the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation. I'm a tribal member and also a member of the Ogiabova Ceremonial Ground. And I also have roots in this part of the country through my mother. My mother was born in Decatur, Arkansas, which isn't that far away. And I've noticed that, I don't know if you've noticed this in families. I mean, the girls tend to follow their fathers, even, you know, and I think that's because, and the boys their mothers. And I think that has something to do with this kind of genealogical, intergenerational weave that happens between grandmother, grandparent, aunts, uncles, like also called mothers and fathers. And it's a way to make a weave, or to weave stories together. So in honor of being here, I think, of course, of my brother who passed not too long ago, and his daughter is here with us, and one of my favorite people. And he was something else. If I start to tell you, then it's going to get in the way of the poem, but I wanted to start with that. He also drove for Tyson. I had uncles with chicken, you know, did all the chicken, you know, I had a lot of family involved with that industry in this area, and on my mother's side. But he was 18 months younger than me, and we were very different. None of our brothers and sisters looked like each other, and we were all very, you know, we had our different paths. But creation story. First, it was me in the mother and father universe. I emerged precariously as an unstable element in the province of fire and water. I came out fighting. I was not a princess. I should have been a boy. I was earth grasping for air. No one in this universe fit precisely anywhere. And then you, my brother, arrived 18 months after on a winter day, along with my mother, who had disappeared to bring me back a gift. It was you, a baby, who was already an old man who even before kindergarten would search the house for cigarette butts to smoke. Empties to glean the last drops of liquid high. In the myth of us, you were the warrior usurper, Earth boy come in to claim territory, to inherit the kingdom of mother and father. I was the protector of my homeland. I bit your thigh and made a mark, and because I was an honorable competitor, we made a pact to stand by each other no matter the weather, as our freshly inhabited parental planet turned and turned, and the world of us disintegrated and broke. We were never able to put it back together. You were a rambunctious cowboy driving semis, circling the country, always looking for our father whose friends called him Chief. He was lost in the embrace of sirens in an underworld bar somewhere far. I was an Indian fighting for our sovereign rights and becoming a poet. Still, it was you and me, no matter our orbits that rarely met. I was always escaping danger, and you were a part of my looking back. We ran and ran, but no one can outrun the story. And yet, I'm standing here beside you, and you are not here. The memory of you laughs, tells your rodeo tales of trips and girls, and there's always cars to buy and sell. I'm still trying to figure out how to keep you alive. That's why I'm here in these words, grabbing your arm. I saved your life twice, once on earth, once in water. The third time I reached for you, but you disappeared. When I lean back into those years when our father fathered and our mother mothered, we go running out into the yard, and there's a universe there. No one will ever hurt us. No one will ever leave. I love seeing that exhibit. I mean, there's a whole history there, a whole history, and it's like no one can outrun the story, and I think that's partly how An American Sunrise came about. I really fought over the title because I thought, well, I don't really want to call it An American Sunrise. I want to call it a Muskogee Sunrise. you know? But at the same time, what I was dealing with and how the collection emerged was dealing with American history. And the stories that aren't told and were outlawed about a year or two ago in Oklahoma. It was outlawed to talk, to tell our stories as Native people, as American history, and now it's gone even farther. We're not even allowed to be up, and our names are not allowed to be spoken as if we were not here. That will change. So this poem came about, and it was about I was a student at the University of New Mexico. I was looking back in the story, and about those moments where we would go out into the mountains and sing after everything had closed down, just to be together in a circle, to be together in that circle, to make a circle. Music makes a circle. Those paintings, that exhibit makes a circle. And so this was about those a little bit of wild times. We were talking earlier at breakfast, some of us who were a little older, and thinking, these young people look at us and think we're decrepit or we don't have stories, but they have no idea that we were even worse than they were. So we know all the tricks. But we learned, it's making stories and finding ourselves. And that's the thing I had to learn at one point when I was at a very precarious moment in my late teens or early 20s, was that I had to learn to take the really rough parts of the story, to accept the rough parts of the story. And because they happened, just like we're dealing with collectively right now, because they happened. And it's important that they're told, that we know that they're then the bad parts no longer have control over us. An American Sunrise. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and some of us could sing. When we drove to the edge of the mountains with a drum, we made sense of our beautiful crazed lives under the starry stars. Sin was invented by the greedy, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We. I guess it's 50 years later now. This is also a song you can find on Spotify. If they play your song, they give you percentages of a penny. you know, which is not cool, but it's out there. So the next one I'm going to read this one from American Sunrise. And was talking earlier with somebody about Jean Quick-to-See Smith. I met Jean when Jody Falwell and I were production assistants for a PBS movie in the 80s that was being made about her and contemporary Native artists. Frank Blythe did that series, and he had to really fight to get the series because PBS and a lot of those entities would not touch stories about contemporary Native people. They just wanted stories of the cavalry coming. And so to get that made, to get permission, was a lot of work on his part. And it was the first, really the first PBS show on contemporary Native people. And so I was trying to make a living as a poet, so I worked as a production assistant. And Jody was really young, and but I remember that's where I met Jean Quick-to-See Smith, and her horse would come over and look in the window. And we became friends, and through the years, and she was wonderful and did a lot artwork for an album and for other things. And I used to tell her, I said, Jean, you paint like a writer, and I write like a painter. And this poem this is a poem when I start painting and I go back to painting in a year. My grandmother was a painter, and my aunt, and so on. And that's how I started it. That's how I got into IA was based on my art. I would like to paint this poem. But it's thinking about, my husband and I were living, and we took a job in Knoxville in Tennessee so we could go look at all our old places where our people lived. You know, there were even some of the houses there. And so this was about that walking into history. And as always, I think with any artist, you're going towards something. You might have an idea, you might have a plan, but the field is open for discovery. I mean, that's why you're doing it. And so that's what happens. I learned something at the end of the poem that I didn't know. How to write a poem in a time of war. You can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedroom, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill, they take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight, like a train blown free of its destination, like a seed fallen where there's no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here. Deer peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. We'd started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter. Ah, these smoky, sweet sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen, though they began building their houses all around us and demanding more. They started teaching our children their God's story. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold with words, even poetry. These memories were left here by the trees, with the trees, the torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to her foot, a young man's note of promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep despite the distant bombs. Terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, none of us will make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandchildren, his grandson, his granddaughter. as he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children. There, it would be hidden from the soldiers, who would take them miles, rivers, mountains from the naval court place of the origin story. Chihoto, Chazari, China, oh, Lakari, Momais, Komet, Awajkan, oh, 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 pe, Yakathlis, Hoin. He knew one day, far day, the grandchildren would return. Generations later, over the slick highways constructed over old trails through the walls of laws meant to destroy, hamper or destroy, over stones bearing libraries of the winds. He sang us back to our home place from which we were stolen in these smoky green hills. Yes, begin here. Okay. So I'm going to end with this little piece. This is in a collection called Gathering the Light that was done. I was asked to do a lecture and then to write a book from the lecture, a little book. So I thought writing the book's going to be harder, so I did that first. I wrote 50 little vignettes, and because, and so this was about IAIA. I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts in 1967, and I'm still here. I arrived in Santa Fe at the Institute, and I'll close with this one and then we'll have our discussion. I arrived in Santa Fe at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which was then a Bureau of Indian Affairs residential arts high school with a 2-year postgraduate program. We were native students from tribal nations throughout what is now called the United States, all of us there because of a demonstrated proficiency in arts. That fall, when I began IAIA, there were race riots across the country. The Vietnam War was blazing. Jimi Hendrix's first album, Are You Experienced, was released. Jim Morrison and the Doors followed with Light My Fire, and Thurgood Marshall was sworn in as the first black justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. The free love explosion was traveling from Haight-Ashbury to in San Francisco, all over the country, including Santa Fe's Canyon Road. Native rights movements were stirring in the wake of civil rights movement, and Alcatraz would soon be occupied. I arrived at the main dorm on the Cerrillos Road campus of IAIA with my metal Army footlocker, carrying everything I owned from Tulsa. When I walked up that wide, tall porch and signed in, I did not look back. In the months before, I'd seriously considered running away to San Francisco, but I needed out of a situation at home, but I was underage and had no credibility as a young Native woman. As I considered that runaway path, I knew I was not savvy. When despair overtook me, I found refuge in drawing and in music. I searched for a path to the doorways offered by artistic practice. Art was natural in me, a constant. I told my mother I wanted to go to Indian school, and at the Indian Agency in Muskogee, I was slated to attend Chilocco Indian School. And it's interesting, I would have met my husband there if I had gone there. Anyway, I was slated to attend Chilocco until my mother mentioned that I was an artist. The agent handed her a brochure of the new arts program at IAIA. I clutched that brochure as like a life preserver, made my application with drawings, and was accepted. With that enrollment, I felt a kind of grace appear, an interception, an affirmation of a path toward a future. I know of the power of arts personally and as a person of my generation. As a child growing up in Oklahoma, I was aware of our native peoples as artists. In my home, I was inspired by the oil paintings of my grandmother, Joy Harjo, a full-blood and deeply cultural Muskogee Creek. She also played saxophone in Indian Territory before Oklahoma was a state. One of my most prized possessions is her painting of Osceola, the Seminole warrior who was our uncle by marriage. Because my grandmother passed of tuberculosis before I was born, her sister, my Aunt Lois Harjo, mentored me. She was also a painter in oils. She worked at the Creek Council House and taught art to community members. There was a place in our communities for artists. Being an artist was something a young Native child could aspire to, as most of us had relatives who worked publicly and respectfully as artists. I grew up knowing of Jerome Tiger, Benjamin West, Solomon McCombs, and Maria Tallchief. Arts were what our people excelled in. It was expected of us. We were present in arts, though our history was not taught and we faced daily discrimination. In the 1960s, the Cherokee artist Lloyd Keevanew had a vision of fostering the talent of young Native artists and developing the field of Indigenous arts. In 1963, Kiva and his team were instrumental in opening IAIA, and so began a watershed age of accomplishment and transformation when Native arts and artists would achieve national and world context and recognition. What I found there was a refuge, and more than that, a family made up of other Native students from all over the country and our arts teachers, all of us on the artist path together. In that incarnation of IAIA, we still had lined up against the wall in one of my classrooms stoves that had been used just a few years earlier to teach female students how to cook and clean for in-town residents. And out back, a dairy barn structure for teaching male students how to farm. When it was time for inoculations, half the student body would run to escape behind those buildings. The staff could be our biggest allies. I got up at 5 a.m. every morning to work in the kitchen detail because of the Pueblo woman who ran the kitchen. And then I'm skipping. Every weekend was a challenge for all of us to make it through the rough terrain of historical trauma. Often students went missing, overdosed, or broke down, and we'd all help each other not get caught. And then I'll skip a little. The teachers of academics were either the best and most dedicated because they loved natives and had pride in their work, or they were there because they had exhausted other avenues and couldn't be hired anywhere else. These were the most eccentric. One world history teacher spent most of the semester addressing nudity in ancient Egypt. Our arts teachers were the finest available, both native and non-native. We learned under the Apache sculptor Alan Hauser, painting and drawing under Fritz Schilder. Mission Indians studied traditional pottery with Otalilola Hopi and graphic arts with Seymour Tubus. Learned traditional techniques with Josephine Myers Wapp, Comanche, and theater with Roland Meinholtz, and many more. Louis Ballard was Quapaw Cherokee from Oklahoma and a renowned composer of classical music at IAIA. He composed for Maria Tallchief, among others, and was one of the first to weave traditional tribal music with European classical styles. He was assigned as my high school advisor. When I started writing and performing music, he became one of my biggest champions. I think of him now as I write the script and the music for a musical that will tell the tale of a young Muskogee Creek musician and his band, and how he discovers how his people are part of the origin story of American music. Though we were young, we had a sense of destiny among ourselves. Our ancestors had imagined us with pride, and we felt an urgency to cultivate and celebrate those cultural gifts. Each of us had found challenge, inspiration, and redemption in practicing our arts as individuals, as members of clans, tribal bands, and nations. Yet, even as our eyes shone with possibility, we arrived there dragging loss, trauma, and grief from all corners of a history that had been enacted against us in the name of manifest destiny. The phrase historical trauma hadn't emerged in the vernacular then, but we were direct evidence of it. Many of us were becoming aware that we had come into a time ripe for a collective national change of identity and personhood, which translates to this period now. These times of chaos are the times that the art and the most, of life-changing art emerges, the most creative times. We were that generation in the late 60s that began to change everything as we questioned who we were as young Native artists, as tribal members with roots in classical tribal thought and culture, who were being inspired, or should I say turned on, by what was happening in the large field of American cultures. We were the generation that changed the face of American Indian art as we challenged stereotypes and tropes that prophesized our extinction. We found groundbreaking ways to make fresh paths over our ancient trails of concept design and architecture. What I learned as a student at IAIA in the late 60s became central to my consequent journey as a Muskogee poet, writer, playwright, musician, and teacher. We were inspired and directed to make our original art born of major traditions in arts and cultures, even as we were venturing out for fresh ideas and images. We were wounded, but it was in the wounding that we would find our strength. As we practiced our arts, we realized that we had a hand in revising the story of who we were as Indigenous nations, who we are as Indigenous nations, who we were, and who we were becoming. We would come to learn that our Indigenous arts and lifeways are crucial to a healthy and dynamic American story. There is no America without us, and our arts, the arts of all our citizens, show the way to a meaningful future. Okay. This is only a test.
Another round of applause for Joy Harjo.
I want to say too, Mado, thank you for inviting me to this incredible art place. And to get to see the exhibit and the art in it, it's been amazing.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm Jordan Poorman Cocker, curator of Indigenous Art here at Crystal Bridges. And as you were reading, I was so engrossed in hanging off of every word, I didn't realize until you paused that it was time to discuss. I have a notebook full of notes. So thank you for your words and for coming to be with us and celebrate the closing of American Sunrise. While I was thinking about framing this exhibition, both theoretically and methodologically, much of my work draws upon Indigenous research practices, which stem out of Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I went to university, and are informed by Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. And I think there's something really tangible about that link between poetry and fine art. And so I want to talk a little bit about this notion of American stories, which is part of the mission of Crystal Bridges, is to celebrate and share American stories. And you said, there is no America without us. And I think that simple reminder is so critical, especially during times such as this, where we're experiencing that amnesia and forgetfulness about where we've been and maybe perhaps who we are collectively. And I also wanted to
Can we wait a minute?
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
let's
pause there, pause there.
I didn't bring my pen up here. I'd be making little notes so I wouldn't get lost with the 2 or 3 questions. Oh, okay. Thank you. Whoops, sorry.
Oh, thank you, Moira Redcorn.
Okay, yeah, if you want to go on with the third, I just need to, yeah.
I mean, these aren't really questions so much as points I'd like to kind of unpack during our conversation, but this notion of American identity, something that I was thinking about with the exhibition is really finding ways to create empathy between audiences and folks who come to the museum and the artworks that we see on view. So can you tell me about An American Sunrise?
Okay. That's a lot. That's a whole book.
I
Yeah.
feel like I've listened to it at least 15 times in the last year and a half.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, I think that we're at a crisis point. I mean, certainly, I mean, we're all here together. I mean, we are Earth. We are essentially Earth at Janagaja. We are Earth. We're in a climate crisis. I mean, those who live around here, you know that it's not usual in February to have days that go up to 80-something, and the next day, it's with a body, and it's a body, she's a body, is, and that's a big change. What happens when you think of Earth as a living entity versus as a resource? I mean, that shifts. And I think that in a way, part of what is going on, so there's the climate, there's the political, there's the hate, the hate, and this just wholesale white supremacist stuff that's going on to erase. I mean, I guess it's to erase the story of America, to erase natives. I mean, how can you do that? You can't. It won't happen. I mean, you can't. You can say you're going to. You cannot. You can't, because it's thin and it won't. It's not made out of anagechka. It's not made out of love. But I think the crisis has come. Things happen. The crisis has come because we collectively are in need of a way to be with each other. And like you were asking, how do we make connections between people who don't talk to each other, or don't understand each other, or people who might think that we should be dead as Native people? I mean, is that even possible to make that? Because so we're at this crisis point. We're at a crisis point. And we live in a world of polarity. But what artists do, what music does, what all the arts do, is they make crossroads. They're not about putting up boundaries, they make crossroads. So we need to find a new way. Yeah, the Department of Education is gone, at least in theory. It's not really. But what does it mean to educate? There's a whole different way of education. I remember years ago I was teaching at University of Arizona and became friends with this guy who was studying post-colonial British literature, and yet he was from a tribal nation in Ghana, and the way he learned music, the way he learned drumming, he would be sent out into the land as a little kid and have to come back and play the sounds he heard. And I thought, I was trying to figure out how to teach like that. But you think about, the education, I mean, what does it mean to be a human being? And maybe we have to go back to that. And that's where Native nations have the goods, so to speak. That's not the right word. That's not, I'd have to revise that. That's why I like writing things down, or even doing music, doing retakes, or doing art, is fooling with it. But that's where we have to go back to, really, is what it means to be human. And those teachings, those original teachings, tell us that. I remember a story when my second grandchild was about to be born. She was the third. I had one from my son. And I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was hearing all the stories from people around, my Navajo friends, and they were telling me, my Navajo friends were telling me, you know, they were all in awe of this story that had happened. They said there's a woman that lives way out on the reservation, and the holy ones appeared to her. They came to her, and you know, she was a very righteous person, so of course she was clean enough in her mind and in the way she lived, so that they would come to her because they knew that she didn't have earbuds in her ears, you know, that she could hear them. And they told her, we are coming to you now. This is a crucial time because this is all, you will lose you will lose this beautiful, beautiful home if you don't remember who you are. People will listen to you. You tell them that they need to remember their prayers. They need to remember they need to remember how to say, you know, the stories, how to take care of this place, which is embedded in all of our stories. It's embedded in our songs, who we are and what we were given to do, which is directly connected to these places that we live in. And so it really has to start there. But what do you do with the story when people came over and were told that we were savages and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering, and I think with my art, I try to find it through what I do is to make connections, is how do you shift? It's going to shift, it has to shift that way because it cannot sustain, this earth, it cannot sustain human beings, two-legged human beings who take resources and forget who they are, forget to sing, forget, who forget that it won't be here. We won't be here. There would be no use for us. So it has to start there, and it has to start with the little kids, and it has to start with us. Every moment's a starting place.
Thank you. It's so affirming to hear you talk about those interconnections between understanding and experiencing art and poetry and this sort of broader network of connections that we all carry to place, and the way that those relationships form our identities interpersonally and collectively. So place is one of the key themes of the exhibition. And really this question emerged for me very early on in curating this exhibit, which is really about celebrating the permanent collection of Indigenous art at Crystal Bridges, and as well as new monumental growth. So many of our new artists to the collection who are providing commissions or who we've purchased art from are here and came to the opening, but the central question that I came back and back to was, how do our connections to art and place reshape what we know about America? And I think something that's special about this museum is that site of ancestral Quapaw, Ogahpa, Wajaji, Osage, and Caddo ancestral and treaty territory. But people don't think about that when they're driving to and from work. They don't think about the simplicity of that. And I think what you're sort of highlighting is such a simple but critical connection to make for folks.
Yeah, and the land acknowledgements are part of it, but I forgot part of the story. So I told the story. I was doing a performance in Flagstaff, and there were several Navajo people there, Dene. And after I told that story, and then I read a poem I'd written for that granddaughter, they came up, this woman came up, she said, I was there. She said, the footprints, we saw the footprints of the holy ones in the sand, and they were long and narrow. So that was an important part of it, you know. Yeah. So the question again was about, about how to make that connection in land acknowledgements. And I've thought about how it's important. I think the land acknowledgements is a start. But I think about those people too, who say, why do we have to do that? That's, we conquered this place. Or this place, I mean, that's what's set in place now, is that, well, we took over. Well, how did you take, how did you took over, what's power? Are guns power? What kind of power is that? What kind of power is it forcing people into particular kinds of mind constructs or spiritual concepts? Because that's not true power. That's not true power. And then I think about how, like all of us, how do you, because I have relatives too. We're all relatives. If you think of Earth, I always like to take the view of standing way above. In your dreams, you could do that. They take you there, and you see the Earth as this living entity. So when you see that, we are one person, and then you get closer and closer, and you see the diversity, and you see how important that is, all of this diversity. And that every place has a story, and that story is part of you. So if you go into a place, it's important to acknowledge the guardians there. Every place has guardians. But I don't know, I'm not sure. Art, again, is the one way that I understand to make those connections and to imagine, because we're collectively imagining. That's what art is. All the arts is collectively imagining a place in which there is connection, there's respect. Imagining a place of respect. Imagining a place of truth-telling, of beauty, of inquiry, curiosity, and moving towards that. At least I found if I start fighting against something, it tears me up. There's been so much I've wanted to post on Facebook. I think, it's important. We have to know what's going on, but at the same time, we've got these little ones coming up. We need to start putting into place while this charade of law, this charade is going on, this horrible story that it's harming people. We have to continue, and maybe more consciously with our communities, and communities getting together in ways, and is setting into place this, what was already here, those original teachings, and and setting that into place to shift, because it will shift in that direction. Because what is this other stuff is it's nasty, and it's thin-minded. There's no history. There's no deep. If you think of what respect is, it's deep. I remember going to, and this is what, I had no plans to be a poet. It's not in career day, for a reason. But I was at the University of New Mexico in art, in an art, studio art major, but going to readings. But what really inspired me was going, the communities around there. A lot of the communities would come to the university's native students because they thought, we had a certain kind of knowledge that could be useful. And so I remember going and hearing these people speaking on behalf of their kind of the genealogy, how genealogy wasn't just human beings, but genealogy was different places, and the stones, and how these kinds of trees here, and how these animals, and the way that they would talk was it was translated. Some would speak in English and in their native language, but it was so profound. And again, the question came up, but did they listen? Or, then you've got legalese language that was made for destruction or to take something apart. And that question came up again. But then I keep thinking, those kind of people can't live. They will not survive. They will have nothing to feed off of if we have a world where they are not imagined, you know. Maybe, but then I think of how these ships came up and we had never imagined anything like that. You see, it gets complicated. It's complicated, but it's complicated, but it's not. You'll never go wrong. You'll never go wrong with kindness. You'll never go, yeah.
I'm going to pick up a thread that you shared around this idea of kinship, which is another one of the themes in the exhibition. And we have some incredible forms of kinship through connections of the Institute of American Indian Arts alumni, which was discussed a little bit in the artist panel yesterday, as well as genealogical kinship represented in Ryan Redcorn's portraits, especially of Ardina Moore and Hikili Bird. But we also have, works that really speak to kinship to materiality or to the natural world, with Kelly Church's basket of resilience, which is that large, 4-foot woven basket with the copper loops.
Yeah, that was amazing.
And what I like about that work in particular is there is the scene, which is this beautifully, masterfully crafted monumental basket that is really in dialogue with these older works. I talked to Kelly about this commission and I said, is there a work that you've always wanted to make but for whatever reason haven't yet? And she talked about these baskets of burden, and that's what the anthropologist called it. And of course, her community did not refer to them as burden, but it refers to that labor. And so it's worn on the back, and it's about 3.5 feet tall, and it's used for harvesting sticks. And so she said she's always wanted to make a basket of resilience. And so she created this beautiful black ash basket with those thousands of copper loops. And that's the outside. The unseen part of the artwork is this hard drive that she's embedded with information about the emerald ash borer, which is decimating black ash trees in the US and in Arkansas as well. And so she imagines a world where maybe there are no more black ash trees, and what happens to Potawatomi basket makers in that world. So on that hard drive, she's embedded all of these different types of ways of preservation, notes on what it means to harvest and process those pieces. And I think for me, something that I take away from each time I reread An American Sunrise are these moments of embedded information that you share through your poetry, through memory, through metaphor. And I think there's really something educational and something that is really, it feels intentional to teach the world, the readers, about ways of knowing and doing. And I wondered if, speaking of, speaking futures into reality, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that intention with your poetry in terms of legacy.
Well, I think the poetry, like I said, I didn't have plans and to be a poet, and it came about during a lot of times of transition and chaos and so on, and Native rights movements and all of them. But it became a way to, I think, to listen. I mean, all art is, all investigative, getting to know yourself and your people and earth and all of it's all about listening, even if you're painting. Even if you're making music or poetry, which is a sound art, but even all of that, it's really about listening. And so what the you know, when I started out, the poetry was, I had to learn how to speak. I always sat in the back. I would not talk. And I saw a lot of things happen, but I was never one of the speakers, you know, at Kiowa Club, at UNM, you know, I just sat in the back, you know, I watched things. But the writing, I think it came out of an urgency to, probably partly to heal, to get to other things, to be able to, it started to become a way of listening and things would show up that I didn't know. And I think that's what happens as artists, is like, you know, a poem, just like a piece of art, like it's one of the paintings I want to do is how to write. I want to do, there's so much in there. It comes about from pieces of history, stories, design, you know, certain kind of design elements that go way back, but I learn things. I don't sit down and write something and think, okay, this is where I'm going to go. I might have an idea, but I listen and things will show up that later I'll find out where they came from, where it comes to light, where it came from. And also I put things in that I've had a lot of mentors and teachers in this world that, you know, both in my family, in other artists, in people who were, you know, in books and you know, just I've lived a life. I feel like I've lived several lives. And some of them are unseen dreams, you know, and some of them are just had a lot of teachers. And so all of that just kind of, I feel like the poetry becomes a place, I sit down to it and I give myself over to it. And then there's all the craft that goes into it. Because some people think, oh, you just write a poem, it just, there it is. And it's like, no. You know, I revise some things. It's just like anything, like even children. Some come fast and they're all put together, and others are a lot harder. Yeah. They give you a hard time, you know, and are complicated. I mean, you know, anything. Worlds are like that, you know. And but so much comes to, you know, like I learned a lot. American Sunrise came about when I decided I took a job at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and my husband, who's here with me, Owen Sepulpa, we know a lot of our family history, and I know that my great-grandfather, his few greats, Manahui, used to stand in that overlook over Knoxville and look down to go steal horses. It wasn't stealing horses because it was not their land, but we went and took horses. That was a place they liked to go get good horses. And I don't remember how I know this story, but it wasn't in a textbook. You know, and the Tennessee River, you know, these rivers were roadways. And so we took it to go down there and go check places out and go feel it out. And that's how the book came about. And I remember when we were getting ready to leave to go back to Oklahoma, and I thought, how weird. What craziness is this? Our people fought. Our people fought, gave their life to be home, to stay here, and we're excited about going back to Oklahoma. Yeah. You know, what do you do with that? And that's how American Sunrise came back. I mean, we have so many contradictions within us that we deal with every day, and so the book, that's how it came out, is how am I going to deal with these contradictions? And that's the poems. And that's how one of the first poems was that, you know, where do you begin? What is that poems start, you know, you begin here. And just trying to unravel it a bit, and even looking at what, you know, it's difficult to look at violence. I'm a romantic at heart. I don't like to write about violence, but it's part of the story. It's also part of our survival, and the hard parts are how we grow spiritual muscle. I think that's why we came to this time, you know, it's to grow and then to pass on. So what comes through in the poetry and even in the music is what maybe sometimes what I need to know, you know, what we all need to know. One of my earliest poems was a poem to get rid of fear, and I needed that poem, but it's gone on to help a lot of people. And I think part of what I do is part of my impetus was I love beauty, and I always liked draw. I used to love to draw and music, but part of it was always healing, and part of it was always justice. Even as a little kid, you know, I was always involved with, you know, working on people's backs or drawing, or, you know, trying to figure out, you know, the stories and really wanting healing, you know, justice for the people, for what I saw going on, you know, in family and in the country and so on.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this is really kind of tying together some of these threads that are emerging in different places in the exhibition, and certainly throughout your poetry, which is that intentional way of looking at the world and searching for that healing, and then sharing, you know, through your work, the labor of that healing and the process of that. There's this one piece, this one passage of your book where you talk about this tub, I think it's enamelware bowl, and what it meant to sort of, in your mind, process a part of, you know, your experience that you've wanted to make a little bit better than it was in life. Mm-hmm. And I went over that several times, and that sort of, I'm not going to go into it, and you don't have to either, but I'm just sort of highlighting that aspect of the work as, you know, we think about with Kelly Church's baskets, these moments of embedded knowledge, and even with Jean Quick-to-See Smith's work, her collage approach to painting, and really bringing in these references that are very poetic. I think it was fitting that you sort of mentioned, you know, the struggle and the strife of also what it means to have stories and books banned. So the Killers of the Flower Moon book by David Graham was banned in the state of Oklahoma a year before the film was released by our governor. And so that tension of wanting to create and make and share history, American history, through story, in the context of, you know, times where those stories are being actively omitted and oppressed, is a challenge. And I guess I have a question about advice for maybe less about fear, but more about courage. What advice do you have for creatives or artists who, as you mentioned, really now is the time for that beautiful art to emerge? Do you have any words of encouragement?
Well, that's the thing, is it's the encouragement would be to do that art and find way. It's difficult in this overculture. I've always called it the overculture, that to be an artist, I mean, what value does, you know, artists aren't given, you know, often have to struggle to get the materials, the time, and I won't go off into talking about women artists or women artists with children. Yeah, Lily can tell us. She can tell us about that. But yeah, it's, you know, it can be a struggle, or even it being okay for a woman to do art. I still deal with that at points, or you get judged for it, for doing it. But it's really important, and I know that just from my own journey to do my art is to take care of it. Now, all of this technology we have, and digital and internet, with all this stuff is supposed to make our lives easier. It has stolen our time. Yeah. It is stolen. So we have to unplug from that. You'll have a lot of time if you unplug from that, and that's part of it, is to reclaim your spirit, and to take the time, make the time. And I know, especially for people with families and jobs and uncertainty, you can get, well, you know, is to make that time. I've learned that there's something about doing something every day, that it becomes that routine time. And then I find that if I have a time and that I go and work and do my art or music every day, that I always say they know where to find me. The the inspiring thoughts and dreams and pieces and ancestors and all that goes into making art and ideas and so on. It will find you. It finds you easier if you've made that time. Yeah. And we all need that. We all need that. Everybody needs it as a human being. It's also good to keep a little notebook. We were walking up here, and suddenly I could hear yellow. I had heard yellow as a sound. It was all of those daffodils. I love daffodils. And there was a huge bunch of them, and you could hear, you could hear that there was a sound to that color of yellow. I thought, that's cool. I'm going to write it. I did. I pulled this out and wrote a little note. So it's good to do that little sketch, but, pay attention to those things and to your dreams. I mean, it's all around. Every one of us, whether we're artists or not, are given, we have there's so much love and support around us. But it's important to acknowledge it, what do you do to feed your spirit? Walking up here, it was really nice. We walked up from the hotel up here, and that's part of it. This water and these trees, but it's really important. That would be the advice, is really to feed your spirit. Seeing this art exhibit too is part of that. We need that as much as we feed our bodies. We're really good at that, or I am. But we also need to feed our mind with fresh ideas, with new thoughts. And, like the daffodils feeding me that thought, okay, here's what we sound like, And then you feed your spirit. That's important.
Something that we've been doing, which is part of my methodology, Talanoa. It's a methodology that was created in New Zealand in Aotearoa and really has roots in education, is to create a dialogue that is facilitated. So I want to take a little bit of time, if it's okay with you, to open up for questions from some of the artists who've been invited from across the country to attend this opening, and then following that, we'll open up to questions for the audience. So I wanted to pause here and see if we have comments, responses, questions from our guest Indigenous artists. Oh, we have a microphone.
I'm Jerry Redcorn, Caddo. Our people were from here. And I wanted to ask you about what the premise was about the Alcatraz takeover, and were you there, and kind of who were the people? I mean, that's kind of my time, my place.
Were you there?
I was not there, no.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be.
Yeah, we all heard about it.
I was there in spirit. I was there in spirit. Yeah.
Yeah, we all heard about it. I remember hearing about it, and I think the premise is that I believe, that there's some law, and there was a law about property that is abandoned
by the U.S. government.
Yes.
Yes.
That it goes back to Native nations or something.
Yes. Right.
And that was the premise, and that's why they went over to say, okay, there's this law, so we are claiming this island back for Native people. That was my understanding of it.
Yes, that was my understanding, and it was nothing. I mean, nothing was there, so why would the government want to stop something that was, that the people wanted to do through illegal means?
Right. Yeah, right, because they weren't doing anything with it, and they had the abandoned prison buildings and so on. And, but no, I wasn't there. I was in, I think, yeah, it started at, I was in school, yeah. But yeah, I was of that, part of that generation. I was a little younger, but I was still, you know, all of that was going on. Wounded Knee, 1973, that was the year when my daughter was born. And, yeah.
Do we have any other questions from our invited artists?
But one thing I was going to say, a lot of the younger people don't know those stories. We
The
were
American Indian movement stories.
no, they you know they don't know they don't know those stories at all. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question from Kaylin Faye.
Thank you. Sio Kailan Feidado. I've been reading your work for so many years, and I've been writing, you know, pulling from your work too at times. And I just want to first of all thank you for all the groundwork you've laid for so many of us to make the things that we're making and continue to inspire us. But I think something that's really beautiful about your work that I really appreciate is it never feels like there's absolutes, and I think that's something that can be so divisive at this moment in time, is the idea that there are absolutes in one side versus the other. So something that I find is this idea of questions, and what are the questions that we're asking, what are the questions we're holding for ourselves in this present moment. And so for right now, I wonder, what are the questions you're holding for yourself, but what are the questions we as creative people, as Indigenous people, or us right now as a whole community in this space, what are the questions you think we could be holding together? What are the questions we could be asking ourselves right now?
That's a good question. I think that's where to start, is what are the questions, you know, what are we holding together? I think we're holding a lot of questions together, like what does it mean to be a democracy? And to recognize that the original democracies were native nations. Yes. Yeah. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be together? You know, what is diversity? To embrace diversity. And there's so much. I mean, we all have those same. Everybody has the same questions about what are we doing here. I mean, I was laying alongside my husband, you know, like, yeah, you're laying there talking, and I'm saying, who created these systems, all of these systems of digestion? I mean, you think about the creation of that, and why, you know. Why this ongoing storytelling? And where does it wind up? And yet, the only way to move through it is with awe and with a sense of profound gratitude and love. You know? And so the question, too, is I think, too, that the stories wind up, we're in this story. There's a reason for it all. I believe in that. I don't know. Sometimes I think that there are instances that there are not reasons. There's points of chaos or insanity. There are no, there's points like that. But if you kind of overlook everything, we were kind of headed in this direction. You know, we were kind of headed in this direction. Certain things could have been subverted, but they weren't. So I think, too, one of the questions I have is, especially being from a people from the Southeast who were illegally removed by a president who went against Congress, you know, one of the questions I have is, now how did that start, and how do we pull up that root? How do we pull up that root of hatred, of entitlement? You know, how do we, so that it cannot thrive, so that it no longer has any power over the collective. You know, and how do we continue to make a world, you know, for those coming up behind us, ahead of us, behind us, and make sure artists, and how do we make sure artists are taken care of? Yeah. And, you know, and have place and the materials they need, and you know, are acknowledged. There was something I was gonna, there was something you said early on too about the arts, and I think about how originally, you know, in, you know, with education, you think about, there's a group of us talking a lot about education and starting a kind of with the children, because we don't want our children, we don't want our grandchildren and great-grandchildren going into a system where Trump Bibles are going to be used for the curriculum. No, and this is real. And so we're thinking of other ways, we're putting together other ways to educate them. But I was thinking about how the arts don't exist. If you've got music, there was usually dance that went with it. And there was usually art. You know, like you could probably sing a basket. I've started doing that in you go to all these hotels and I start singing the patterns when I'm walking along. But it's all connected. And it's connected to place, like the materials. You were talking about that basket and how the materials of the ash that you see. So the question is, maybe an overall question is really about what does it mean to, what is knowledge that nourishes versus, and that's what we're dealing a lot too with the collective right now is what is knowledge that nourishes versus knowledge that's like what I used to say, Barbie cereal, you know, you know, our thoughts. It's a real question about that. Yeah. Anyway, that's good. That we could go on and on with that, but thank you.
Lily Hope.
We have to use our voices for good. I'm Lily Hope Weaver on Instagram. First name Lily, last name Hope. Just a weaver from Alaska. Thanks for having me down here. I guess I just wanted to not cry. Didn't sleep much. But thank you for the permission or encouragement to recognize spirit and a spiritual practice through making. I don't know how many of y'all have a therapist. Y'all should have one. They're great. They can talk you through big feelings. It really takes the edge off your husband or your significant partner. But through a couple years of therapy, and then my therapist broke up with me because she's like, "You're doing great." Sorry, don't need to give you a narrative about the spiel of Lily Hope Weaver, but really about like, she was like, how's your mental health? How's your physical health? How's the life of your children? And how well do you feel? And then how is your spiritual practice? And in all of the other areas of my life, I could go 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. I love my kids. I love making dinner. I love playing. I love blah, 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 blah. And I never acknowledged until just now that my making and showing up every day is my spiritual practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yancy Redcorn.
Anyway, it was real quick, Lily. Yeah, I always see Lily and I see her mother and I see her people. And thank you.
Just a quick question. I was curious, in your writings, your poetry, and is it you? Because you in the talk you talked about, you know, we do good art in chaos, and this is a good time to do all that and to do that. And I'm not going to like throw out percentages or anything like that, but You know, do you write better when things are not going well and like all around, or do you write better when you're happy? I'll give you an example of Lyle Lovett. He wrote an album and it was great, and it was after a breakup, and then when he got married to Julia Roberts, he couldn't write anything because he was happy, and then after he broke up, or she left him, he wrote another great album. So I was just curious, you know, do you write? Do you feel like your life needs to be in chaos for you to be able to create art?
I hope not, yeah. But I get it. I was told, I know Neil Young just came out. Sometimes I'll go on and listen new songs. And Neil Young has a new song, and I like some of his older stuff, but I know that he's real, he and, what is her name? The actress, Daryl Hannah, are very happy. And I heard that song, and I was telling my husband, I said, you know, it's not a very good song, but I like that he's so happy. So for me, there's usually an intensity buildup. I mean, you can't sit there and wait for it. You write, and then I just get intrigued with something and write through it. But you tend to, you know, we all tend to go towards, you know, there's probably part of that has to do with an emotional buildup and release. And for some people, there's a young poet out there. What is his name? Young black poet, and his stuff is all happy. Everybody marvels at that. Yeah. But he's the one everybody goes to if you want, you know, happy poet, you know, happy poetry. I think for me, maybe not. It's because you're trying to figure things out. And maybe I don't know. I won't say. I'm going to say we don't take happiness for granted, because when it often happens in these small moments, too, that no one would notice. Those moments of profound happiness. You know.
Thank you. I know we have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. I've been trying to mime every 10 minutes or so to our learning and engagement officer, Moira. So Moira, could you talk a little bit about how folks can participate?
If you haven't yet, you can scan the QR code right behind Jordan and Joy and submit your question. We do have one. This is from Denise. She thanks you for what you said about kindness and for your poem, I Give You Back. I love the sense of humor in American Sunrise, along with the more serious elements. Might humor be our saving grace?
Might humor be what?
Our saving grace.
Of course. I was thinking about that too humor is a big part of it too. And I try to, I don't know, I think we all have these secret desires, and I love comedy and I love comedians, but I'm not really good at it. I have moments of it, and I was good friends with Charlie Hill, the Oneida comedian. And one time I told him, you know, Charlie, we were both standing in the back of the line when they were passing out careers. But then if you think about it, a poem is sort of, you know, a comedian, you have you're kind of telling little stories in these moments except you get laughs if you're a comedian. But it's very similar because it's really about life and mystery and stories and history and human behavior and so on. Yeah. But no, it's very important. I think that's what's kept me going through these times, a lot through these times, is finding humor in the ridiculous.
I think just to add to that, I mean, humor is so critical in healing as well. We have a work in the show by Bobby Dews, who's part of the 1491's comedy group called IHS Dental Plan. And The quote, the artist quote that he shared for that work that's on the label is, "I don't care what your teeth looked like, I just want to see them. I want to see you smile." So it's a portrait of Dallas Goldtooth with a golden tooth.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. This one is, Joy, is there one thing that you believe each of us can do that will make a measurable difference in the world?
I think that that's for each person to know. Everybody came in with gifts to share, and everybody. So I can't answer that for everyone, but everyone can answer that for themselves. Who's this over here?
Yeah, who's that? Got a little furry audience member.
Yes.
Well, thank you. In conclusion, Joy Harjo, thank you so much for coming to Crystal Bridges today and celebrating the closing of American Sunrise. And we have a book signing after this talk to follow. Aho meonde malo alpito. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Mero.